as Mrs. Knifle's ready to get started. All right, so we are on chapter 7. It is day 4 on the island, and it is 6:20 a.m. Remember, they finally found people. They had an airplane. They're pumped. Yes, we're going to be saved. And then they saw murder. And guess what? Now they can't go find those people because they don't want to be killed too. So now it's day 4, chapter 7. Will Greenfield's camp was less than half a mile from his fellow castaways in a small clearing in some dense jungle. It wasn't much of a clearing, but then again, it wasn't much of a camp. A small fire was the only comfort. Will slept on the cool ground wedged between two trunks. A hump created by exposed roots provided his pillow. Not exactly a four-poster bed, Will reflected, but he didn't seem to need much sleep anymore. Crazy, but true. His bug bites and the off-and-on rain kept him awake. His fear and racing mind kept him alert. He lay down because in pitch dark there was nowhere he could go without getting lost. Even then, he only dozed off here and there. Mostly, he squinted at the fallen log that stretched over him. Suspended a few inches above his chest in the dim firelight, he could see thousands of ants scurrying across the rotting deadwood. A metropolitan of them. They made him even more restless. They all seemed so busy. Watching them marching to and fro filled him with an urgent desire to do something. The fire helped. Last night he had spent hours using a jagged rod to sharpen straight sticks into arrows. At least it had felt like hours. There was no way to judge time when the sun was down. And at the very first pre-dawn light, he was off through the jungle in search of a piece of wood he could use as a bow and arrow. Even now it seemed nuts, like he'd never had the guts to shoot at someone. The idea sobered him up. Those kids were dangerous. He still wasn't sure how, but they'd gotten him separated from his sister, lost in Guam. They were keeping him from the Phoenix, which might have left without him. His life could be in danger. Liza's too. They were after him, and he was outnumbered, 3-1. He needed some kind of weapon to defend himself. He began testing twigs for their flexibility. The first snapped in his hands. Then he dropped it with a yelp of shock. He was a wimp. This was for sure. He'd never even been in a fist fight, except with Liza. That was another story. He and Liza could really mix it up. No joke. They'd even put each other in a hospital once, which was why they'd been set on charting a new course. Even though Liza was a first-class pain in the butt, he would have given anything to see her face right now. Liza was smart. She'd be able to figure out what was going on. Every time he tried to think it thought, the mist came back, and with a terrible headache. Oh, Liza, you're never here when I need you. He found a couple green branches that was gnarled into a C shape. Perfect. He began experimenting with vines. Most broke at the slightest tension. Those that held up were too stiff. At last he found one with both strength and springiness. Carefully, he plucked off the leaves and knotted the ends to his bow. Now to test it. He positioned the arrow against the vine. Even though no one was watching, he felt himself redden. Who did he think he was, Robin Hood? He could almost hear Liza's taunting him. If you shoot anything besides yourself with that. Before he could finish her sentence, there was a violent rustling, and out of the underbrush bust a dark blur. Will froze in terror. It was one of those wild pigs. No, bigger than that, a boar. It had to be. This thing was a beast with black fur and swine-like appearance. It ran at full speed. No holds barreled. Will was sent flying as the animal charged at him. Dark blood appeared on the calf of his leg where the sharp tusk had brushed by. By the time he could scramble back up, the animal was bearing down on him again. Luckily, the boar was as disorganized as it was furious. It thundered every which way, turning constantly. Yet each charge was made with the utmost purpose. Gasping and snorting with rage, it reeled for another assault. A tree, Will thought desperately. Climb a tree. In a panic, he looked around. Plenty of trees, but all the close ones were palms. Long, smooth trunks, difficult to climb. His eyes fell on the bow, which lay on the ground, right where he had dropped it to make his escape. Where was the arrow? Then he saw it, partly hidden by a fern. It stuck straight up, its point buried in the soft earth. For an instant, his mind raced through all the reasons this was a bad idea. You'll never make it in time. You haven't tested it yet. You'll put your eye out. Look at those tusks. He dove just as the boar sprang forward. He picked up the bow and rolled, flailing an arm for an arrow. When he felt the stick in his palm, he yanked it out of the ground, sat up, aimed, and let fly. The arrow shot from the bow at a wild angle just as the attacking animal leaped. It caught the boar in the side of the snout, right behind the flat nose. Direct hit! Wham! Will crumpled back on the ground as the animal's full weight slammed into him. It was on top of him. He could see it, feel it, smell it. He waited for the ripening force of the tusk to tear into him, and suddenly the black fur that filled his field of vision was gone. The wounded boar reared up like a frightened horse, squealing in pain. Then it turned tail and disappeared into the jungle once more. Will lay flat, the bow across his stomach, waiting for the beating of his heart to return to normal. When his brain finally unfroze from the terror mode, it was to admit a single thought. I need more arrows. Lots more. All right, so he was able to shoot a boar, and when he shot the boar, it hurt the boar enough to scare him away. So he didn't die from the wild boar. Go, Mr. Will. But he's clearly still crazy, still is having amnesia, doesn't know what's happening in his life. We are now on chapter 8, day 4. It is 6:55 a.m. And Sikorosity, however you say his last name, crawled out of the rebuilt shelter, scratching at ant bites and squinting through the brilliant morning of the lean-to's roof. Rain had come on and off all last night. Huge, clammy droplets had fallen like bombs from the shelter ceiling. The 3 castaways had barely slept a wink. According to the documentary he'd seen, tree bark was supposed to be waterproof. It was a lesson he'd been learning over and over again since the sinking of the Phoenix. Real life wasn't the same as TV. He sighed miserably, and if he'd come to that conclusion a month ago, Mom and Dad probably never would have sent him on charting a new course in the first place. A thought of his parents so far away choked him up a little. Odd. The things he missed the most, the label diagram of the solar system that hung on his wall. He couldn't remember the names of the 2 Saturn's moon, his goldfish, Dot and Com, even his mother's pot roast, which was particularly lethal, and the sound of his father practicing his trombone. He forced himself to concentrate on the problem at hand. Did the roof need more bark, different bark, bigger pieces laid out in a new pattern? Mud for martyr, maybe? Luke would know. He always knew what to do. It wasn't that he made so much information. It's just he knew exactly how to use information that he had. Ian could memorize the encyclopedia and still not be able to come to the courageous decision that Luke made every day. If there was one good thing that came out of this horrible situation, it was getting to know a great guy like Luke Haggerty. The rain began again. At least the Discovery Channel had been right about that. The tropics were wet in the summer. Look at the bright side, he told himself. Rain meant drinking water. The castaways still hadn't found a freshwater stream or spring on the island. There probably wasn't one. They were rare on small cays like this. That meant they would have to survive on what fell from the sky. He walked over to the spot on the beach where they had stuck 28 coconut shells in the sand to serve as rain catchers. Along with them was a yellow rubber rain hat, which Ian had rescued from the burning Phoenix. Full marks to the TV. That hat had been their only source of water on the raft. Each cell had maybe a couple inches of water, less in the hat, which was wider. It was another example of how TV and reality are 2 different things. Yes, setting out receptacles would gather rain, but not much rain. The storms were heavy but quick. For a good supply of water, they needed a lot more shells, or Noah's food, or Noah's flood. With a sad shrug, he picked up the rain hat and drained it. Then he drowned 3 coconut shells in rapid succession. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but this was all they had, and he wouldn't dream of drinking more than his share. When he finished, he was even thirstier than before. It was a different kind of thirst than they had experienced during those awful days on the raft. That had been a burning, paralyzing feeling of parched desperation. You knew that if you didn't drink, you'd be dead very soon. Here, there were always some water, a pint when they needed a quart when they needed a gallon, enough to save their lives, but not satisfy their constant craving. This was the kind of thirst that could go on for weeks, months, maybe even years. It wouldn't kill them, but it was sure to do something even scarier. It would wear them down and drive them mad. Angrily, Ian took one of the empty shells and hurled it with all his might. It hit the sand and rolled, disappearing over the shelf where the beach angled down towards the water. A guilty feeling came immediately. Who was he to throw away one of their precious rain catchers? He ran over to retrieve it and froze. His heart pounded like a drum solo in his chest. The effort to keep from passing out claimed every ounce of strength he had. A body lay limp and motionless in the sand. Its lifeless, outstretched arms framed a single word from his sign, practically erased by the tide: alive. Another bad joke in the long, cruel comedy routine that had been delivered all to them. He couldn't bring himself to move any closer. If it was JJ or Liza, no, it was a grown man. The captain? Luke! Luke! The sound of his own voice, thin and high pitched, terrified, and must have terrified the others too, because they came running. All three fixed their eyes on the huddled shape and moved slowly towards it as though wading through molasses. Okay, so now there's a body. We don't know whose body, but there's a body. What? Nolan.
Molasses is a type of syrup that's super sticky.
Yeah, they're saying that they're moving so slow getting to this body because it's literally a body that they're like, it's like they're walking through molasses, like thick and like can't move because they're kind of in slow motion because they're walking up to a body.
I have a book about I survived the Great Molasses Flood.
Oh, nice. It was Luke who mustered the courage to reach down and roll the body over. Pasty gray skin and wild staring eyes. The face looked unreal, like a wax figure. A collective mourning sigh escaped them. This was not the body of Captain Cascaden. It's the guy, gasped Luke, the fourth man from the plane. He pointed to the near bullet hole dead center in the victim's forehead. We were right. They killed him. But that happened all the way on the other side of the island, Charla said weakly. What's he doing here? The current must swing around this way, Ian decided. He couldn't take his eyes from the fatal wound. Whatever blood had been there had been washed clean by the hours in the ocean. Now the bullet hole was exactly that, a hole and an empty space. In the past 2 weeks, they had come to know death. Captain Cascaden of the Phoenix had been swept overboard. Their shipmates Liza and JJ had been lost at sea. They had all seen Will descend into unconsciousness and then a fevered amnesia that could cost him his life. But this was the first time any of the castaways had ever been face to face with a real dead body. It was stunning, gut-wrenching, horrifying, yet oddly memorizing. None of them could take their eyes away, but it also presented an awkward problem. Charla was the first to bring it up. What are we going to do with him? We can't just leave him there, Ian put in. His body will decompose. The birds and animals will... His voice trailed off. When would he ever learn to shut up? No one wanted to hear it. We'll give him a decent burial, Luke said suddenly. I know people who never got funerals no matter how much they deserve them. We've got to take a chance to bury one guy. Let's take it. As soon as the words were out of Luke's mouth, Ian knew it was the right choice. He was full of admiration. That's what it takes, he guessed, to be a leader. In his own mind, Luke wasn't so sure. Burying a fully grown man was going to be a huge job, especially without shovels or any kind of digging equipment. They were probably still weak from the raft. They had eaten nothing but fruit in over a week. They were getting water, but not much. Yes, this was the right thing to do, but did it make sense? No one wanted to touch the body any more than absolutely necessary. They rolled the dead man over into the blackened cabin top and carried it like a stretcher into the jungle. Let's take it far in, Carla suggested. Luke understood instantly and agreed. This man could not hurt them now, but a grave was a reminder of death. If they buried him in the nearby woods they had foraged for food and firewood, they'd be inviting death into their daily lives. The body was heavy and going rough. Some groves and trees were so dense that the raft wouldn't fit between the trunks, so they were forced to change directions. On they trudged. They kept going, mostly because they didn't know where to stop. They were kids on a boat trip. How could they have been ready for all that has happened? Shipwrecked, adrift at sea, marooned, and now this. Crazy, Luke thought. The guy was dead. He wasn't exactly going to be enjoying a view. What difference did it make where they buried him? Luke stopped. Right here, he decided. Then came the digging. They had no tools, so they used their bare hands. A crisscross lattice of thick vines had to be torn away. It was filthy work. The three of them soon covered in dirt, mixed with dripping sweat to form a layer of slimy mud. Was this how Will was living in the middle of the jungle? Bugs everywhere, worms the size of gardener stake, huge ringed cockroaches, giant slugs, strange fat caterpillars, bagworms, Ian called them. Was it crazy to think Will was alive somewhere in this never-ending wilderness? They hadn't seen so much as a trace of him in 3 whole days. Maybe his memory had come back and he was trying to find them, but he was lost in the vast sameness of the jungle. There were so many ways to get hurt out there. An unseen vine, a bad fall, or broken ankle, he'd be at the mercy of the snakes. No way to get food or water. Don't think. Dig. The hole took over an hour. Finally, they lifted the body off the raft, dropped it inside the grave. They filled it with dirt. For Luke, even burying and sinking of the Felix had been easier to stomach than this terrible task. The others felt it too, an overpowering desire to put this gruesome experience behind them. Let's get out of here, Ian panted when his last handful of dirt was in place. No, Luke said simply. Come on, urged Charla. This is creepy. We buried the guy. Let's beat it. Not yet, Luke insisted. Somebody should say something. We don't even know his name, she complained. He's probably got a driver's license or passport or something like that, Ian put in. We never checked. Charla was impatient. You want to go digging for it? Let's just get it over with, said Luke. He had only been to one funeral in his life, his great-uncle's. His parents had gotten him all decked out in his best suit. He looked around. He and his fellow castaways were clothed in ratted shorts and T-shirts, ripped, faded, salt-encrusted, and filthy with mud. Their sneakers were battered and full of holes. They weren't exactly dressed to deliver a eulogy. Not knowing what to do, Luke stood at attention, as if they were playing the national anthem at a ball game. Ian put his hand on his heart. For all we know, you were a bad guy and you got exactly what you deserved, Luke began. But maybe somebody somewhere is going to miss you the way our families miss us. They won't know where you are or why you don't come home or what happened to you. And that's got to feel pretty sad. A muffled sob escaped Ian. Charla put an arm around his shoulders. Or maybe that person misses you the way we miss Liza and JJ, who never got any funeral. Not even a lame one like this. Or maybe it's more like Will. We know he's out here, but his voice broke. All 3 of them were crying now. Even at times of greatest desperation on the raft, they had never wept like this. The sun was high in the sky, more than half the day wasted. Suddenly, Luke's sorrow transformed into a flare of rage. Anger at the judge for sentencing him. Anger at Mr. Radford, the mate of the Phoenix, for deserting them. Anger at himself for letting Will get away. Anger even at the man in the ground for dying and putting them through this. The moment passed. He drew a deep breath. Anyway, what do you care? He finished to the mound of earth and the death. He finished to the mound of earth at his feet. You're already dead. Amen, Ian barely whispered. Rest in peace, added Charla. The ocean, Luke thought. That was the only way to be cleaned them of this horror, a good long swim. He bent down to pick up the raft. Wait, Ian exclaimed suddenly. The younger boy was pointing at a small gap in the underbrush about 10 feet from the grave, right there in the soft ground. Footprints. Will. All right, we are going to stop there for today. We are 2 more chapters done. We don't have a live tomorrow because it's an e-learning day, so there will be no read aloud tomorrow. So we'll pick up with the read aloud on Monday. Bye, guys.
Miss Knifel, guess what I just found? Because I'm doing like a deep clean, and I just found my 4th grade AR thing.
Oh, that's cool.
Um,